I think one thing I am enjoying that has come out post-pandemic is that there's a greater focus on mental health. People are more open about expressing, and the data and the research really demonstrates that giving children that platform to express how they're feeling, because their feelings are valid. If they feel mad, that's okay, because that's their feelings. Those feelings and expressing those feelings, it's so important. And the research is indicating very much that it does support better mental health in later life. I'm looking out, the sky is a little bit grey, but it's raining, and rain bizarrely reminds me of home, because I'm from the west coast of Ireland, where it rains about 364 days a year. So maybe I'm feeling nostalgic. I like the rain. The children's writer within me is creating these ideas, these tales, these stories with morals, these stories with lessons to be learned. And at my very core, I am a storyteller. I love writing, and I always have done. I often use the phrase with clients, if the brain can think it, it can scare you with it. And that's often what anxiety is. It's thinking about what might happen.
Hello and welcome to the Qualified Tutor podcast, the podcast that brings you the latest in the world of tutoring, edtech and education, and hopefully inspires in you the big change that each and every one of us is capable of. Qualified Tutor is an industry-leading tutor training organisation and online tutoring community for thousands of tutors around the world. This podcast is the voice of this community, where we aim to hear from tutors, teachers, entrepreneurs, coaches, business experts, students, tutorpreneurs, and more from the world of tutoring about what inspires them every day, how they can help tutors like you, and what they've learnt about tutoring along the way. The question is, what will you learn today? Hello and welcome, listeners, to the 127th episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. My name is Ludo Miller, the host of this podcast. Welcome back to regular listeners. Welcome to any of you for whom this is your first time listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast. And of course, a very warm welcome to our guest today, Amy Solon. Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
That's our pleasure, really it is. Amy is a hypnotherapist and parenting coach, and one of a small number of specialists in the UK teaching and practicing a special method called the Golding process, otherwise known as sleep talk. If you've heard of that before, then great. And if you haven't, then I'm sure we'll discover a bit more about what that means and what that entails for specialists over the next 25 minutes or so. Now, Amy is a former primary school teacher in Northern Ireland, but currently resides in the, as we were just discussing, beautiful Dalgety Bay, just north of Edinburgh in Scotland. And when we first spoke, Amy had just come out of a wonderful Edinburgh Fringe Festival performance and was regaling me with tales of past Fringe performances that have had an impact on her and her family, including her daughter. Now, no pressure this time around, Amy, to regale our listeners with similar tales now that we're on air. But I'm delighted to be welcoming someone to the podcast with such experience in the lives, minds, and experiences of the children and adults she works with. And really, as I'm sure you'll come to understand, listeners, such a passion for helping others. Now, Amy, it's really great to have you on. Can I ask, what's giving you reason to smile today, Amy?
Oh gosh, what's giving me reason to smile today? I'm looking out, the sky is a little bit grey, but it's raining, and rain bizarrely reminds me of home, because I'm from the west coast of Ireland, where it rains about 364 days a year. So maybe I'm feeling nostalgic. I like the rain. But yeah, we've had a lovely summer, and as I was just saying to you before we started this podcast, I've slipped back very nicely into a work routine. And usually after, a weekend away or a week away, I find it hard to get my head back into gear. But I don't feel like I'm there today. I just feel very motivated and focused. So that's making me smile.
Perhaps because you knew you had such an important conversation coming up in the evening.
Absolutely. I've been thinking about you all day, Ludo.
You wouldn't be the first podcast guest, don't worry. Now, Amy, I wonder if you were able to gather any tales from your school days. I know lots of guests have been able to come up with tales from their past, tales from their teacher, of kind of what they were like as a child, what they were like as a school kid. Do you have any kind of memories of any patterns or threads that you remember from school teachers giving you feedback as a child?
Yes. When I first started thinking about that came into my mind, I was quite a good girl in school. I wasn't much of a troublemaker, really. Well, I don't think I was. Maybe I was. Anyway, that's by the by. I think I'll reflect on that later. But I used to always get in trouble for sneaking my library books into school and reading them under the table. And there was one teacher in particular, Mrs. Gilmore, and she'd always say, Amy, put that book away. We're doing maths or we're doing geography or we're doing whatever. And I'd put it away for a minute, but then I'd get back just because I couldn't wait to read what would happen next. And I really remember at the end of the school year and the school report, her feedback was that I realized halfway through the year that you weren't being a bold girl, that you just loved reading so much. And that kind of sums me up. I devour books, and I always have a book in my bag. I don't have, I've forgotten what they're called, the Kindle. I don't have a Kindle. It has to be a proper paper book that I can feel and smell. I love libraries. I love bookshops. I'm surrounded, you can't see it, but I'm surrounded by books. Yeah, so that's probably one of my main memories from school that probably sums me up quite well.
A conscientious, and very hardworking student, I imagine. I'm sure that was, besides the sneaking them in, I'm sure that's a teacher's dream, is to have students who just cannot stop reading.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Amy, I wonder if that love of reading has kind of directed, or at least kind of led the way for what you do now. I mean, obviously, your role at the moment is not writer, but it certainly involves a lot of research and a lot of understanding the reason behind why the children and adults you work with act and behave like they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I just wondered, is that, what do you think is your why then, Amy? I mean, why do you think you do what you do now?
Yeah, well, certainly in relation to your first remark, I'm a storyteller. That's what I do, whether I'm working with children or whether I'm working with adults. I'm using stories, I'm telling stories, whether that's my own experiences, whether it's when I work with children particularly, they're not necessarily, because adults love stories as well. The children's writer within me is creating these ideas, these tales, these stories with morals, these stories with lessons to be learned. And at my very core, I am a storyteller. I love writing, and I always have done. And yeah, that definitely has led into my why. I remember in primary school, that question that teachers or even parents or adults ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? I remember so clearly telling a teacher that I wanted to fix people's problems. I have refined that view today. I'm more about solution finding and facilitating the process rather than fixing these days. But it definitely absolutely led me to where I am today. I graduated with my degree in psychology, postgrad qualifications in teaching, coaching, hypnotherapy, different parenting approaches, amongst lots of other things. And my why has always, I'm very heart-led in what I do. I have to have a very fundamental belief in both the process that I'm working with, and my principles, I suppose, guiding with that, because that's very, very important to me.
Yeah, almost helping your why is helping other people find their why.
Yes, exactly.
In a nice kind of roundabout way. I think that's amazing, Amy. And just touching on youngsters there that you mentioned. I mean, stress and anxiety are two kind of broad fields which you work in, Amy, and they have always played a large role in education, but perhaps over the last couple of years have played an unfortunately even greater role in our education system. Can you give us a bit of an insight into the physiology of stress and anxiety? What does it really look and feel like for children?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, there's so many different ways to explain it. I suppose I like, going back to that storytelling. I like analogies. I like metaphors, and I often use the example of a smoke alarm. We have an inbuilt smoke alarm essentially that is alerting us to the dangers that are around us, whatever that might be. It's a very important system. It's there to keep us safe, commonly known as a fight or flight, amongst other things. But many of your listeners, I'm sure, will have heard of that fight or flight response, which is that cascade of chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, etc., that enable a person to, I suppose, fight in a situation or flee from the situation. I talk often about, the times of our ancestors, the saber-toothed tigers, where the fight or flight gave us those chemicals to either spear that tiger or flee from the situation. And then you have those long periods of rest in between the peaks and troughs of stress, I suppose. But time has moved on. Our physiology hasn't necessarily. It's still a very good inbuilt system, but I feel that it's firing too often and too frequently, and we're often not seeing the tigers are there, but we don't see them. That might be in the place of technology. I feel that we never have the chance to switch off. We're constantly on the alert because we're getting pings, notifications, we're getting all these horror stories through the media, through different media apps and so on, emails coming in, WhatsApp notifications, text messages, not being able to switch off. Irrespective really of your age, life is becoming more stressful, and that smoke alarm, that internal anxiety system is just firing more frequently. And I suppose what I do is work with people to just dial it down a little bit, to soothe it a little bit, to we don't want to eliminate it because it serves such an important function, but we want to create an environment where we're, I suppose, responding rather than reacting to the many and numerous triggers that we have in our life on a daily basis. Those tigers that were few and far between are now very, very frequent and not always visible. I often use the phrase with clients, if the brain can think it, it can scare you with it. And that's often what anxiety is. It's thinking about what might happen, because the fact is that we don't know what's around the corner, what's down the path. And even if the absolute worst thing were to happen, which usually, let's face it, it doesn't, the chances are we would have the tools, the resources to cope, and certainly cope better than we would think we would do.
Absolutely. I love that phrase. If the brain can think it, it can scare you with it. I mean, that can be such a handy method for overcoming or for helping your clients overcome the anxiety as it starts to descend. I wonder then, I mean, turning from the student or the child to the teacher or the tutor or the educator, we could say, how can, in their place of work or at work, how can educators overcome stress and anxiety? Is it the same way that children can in their lives?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I find that within my hypnotherapy work, I started working with adults and then progressed later on to working with children. But certainly the tools are the same. And I think what I think I've said to you before, for instance, I don't have a smartphone. I do have one, but it's my husband's old phone that is used on the Wi-Fi. So it's here at home, and I don't have it out and about because it's not linked up to a number. So I'm not getting constant notifications because I know that, and I did have one for a while, but it just mentally didn't work for me because I was never switching off. So I often think that that's maybe even just have a little break for an hour, even half an hour from having the phone, and maybe just looking at what's around, because we can get so engrossed in what might happen, what could happen, that we miss a lot of those things that are going on around us. So I think for anybody, whether you're an educator or whether you're not, just getting those moments that feed your soul in some way. So I often talk about, and everybody is different, and I would never claim that what I do is the panacea or the best approach for everybody. But I start my day, I've got two little children, they are 4 and 6. I start my day, I get up before everybody else, and I go to my back garden, rain or shine, with a cup of tea, and I sit in the back garden and listen to the birds, even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes. But that's my time for me. And then if the rest of the day is go, 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 I can handle that because I know I've had those first few moments in the day. And some of them, sometimes it's longer than others. Sometimes I get a full half an hour. But I have those moments just to really let myself relax, to notice what's going on, because I think we can miss so much. And even tuning into our senses, I like sitting out in my back garden. I sit in my chair. I just take a few moments to breathe in, notice the fresh air. I'm lucky enough to live close to the sea. Can often smell the sea salt. Notice what I'm smelling, what am I hearing. Often you hear the birds around you. I've got two little squirrels that fight on the fence behind me, so they're often squabbling. Notice what I'm seeing, and for me, it's the trees that are surrounding me, and it just enables me to really ground into nature, and I can feel my nervous system beginning to calm and beginning to relax. But there's so many different ways to do that. For some people, it's going out for a run. For some people, it's sitting in a coffee shop with a book. For other people, it's going to the library, or there's no right. My other thing that I love doing is sea swimming, because that's where I feel I'm so insignificant in this huge body of water. I'm this tiny little person, and everything feels so insignificant to me. But I think taking that time out, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, and I think we can all find 5 minutes that are just about what we need, whatever that is, just to do the things that enable us to forget about, because gosh, we'll spend the rest of the day, I'm spending the rest of my day looking at my emails and, oh gosh, I forgot to do this, or I need to arrange that, or so I know that having those few moments at the beginning of the day just sets me up in the right frame. The other thing that I think can be really helpful, and actually I thought I'd bring it along because it's a really nice thing to do. I use this little stone. You can use any stone. We just have this little palm stone that we use in our house, and at the end of the day, we pass the palm stone around between me and my children. My husband joins in if he's around, and just talk about the things that were good about the day, the things that were nice, the things that we appreciated, the things that we were grateful for, because that sense of gratitude, I feel, is so important. I'm probably quite a grateful person, actually, by my very nature, but I notice that when I'm in that practice of gratitude, that I'm actively looking for more things that make me feel grateful, because there's so much that I am thankful for, and I think it's priming your brain to search for more. Essentially, the scientific term is the reticular activating system, and if you feed your brain a certain focus, the more you focus on that thing, the more your brain will will give you, essentially. And if you focus on all the stuff that's going wrong, well, that's what your brain thinks you want to understand and see. So it gives you that. Whereas you can, if you change your focus, and we can focus so often times on the problem, that when we do focus on the solution or the nice things, well, we can start carving that new way of perception, perceiving the world and perceiving the good things that are going on for us.
What a beautiful little message there, Amy. I'm sure that is a really very productive activity. I think listeners who are tuning in here, with those of you who have children, I think that could be a wonderful little activity to bring into the end of the day. Even if it's just a moment where you talk about how you feel that day, even if the gratitude part is not something your children align with, or it's not something they understand to begin with, I think just that act of talking as a minimum is really beneficial, and then you can move on to the gratitude thing. I know I've heard that lots of times, that living that gratitude and being very purposeful about that, and actually, when perhaps this ties in a little bit, but maybe not directly but indirectly, Amy, with this beautiful story about your daughter you told me last time we spoke, being really engrossed in something so simple as a leaf that she'd picked up off the floor. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how that tale ties in with technology and focus in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. I watch both my girls, but my younger daughter particularly, she is so caught up in the moment. And it is such an absolute pleasure to watch. And I really learn so much simply by observing her, because I think I can, like so many other people, get caught down rabbit holes of worry and to-do lists and what ifs and so on, that, like I was saying earlier on, half the things we worry about, it's such a pointless exercise. What's in your control? What can you do about it? If you can't do anything, put the worry to side and move on to the next thing. I know, easier said than done, of course, or oftentimes easier said than done. But I watched my little girl, who just turned 4 in July, and I was watching her. I can't remember where we were last week, but she does this in every activity she's involved in. But yeah, she was just following this leaf, and she was just so engrossed in this leaf. This leaf was the most magical thing. I could have given her, I don't know, the latest gadget. I'm not really into gadgets, so my brain is racking for something cool, and I don't know. I'm not a techie, as you probably
maybe.
know. So yeah, this leaf was the most amazing thing. She was just following it. She was contouring it with her hands. She was the textures. She was watching it move. She was blowing it and then watching it come up, come down. And this went on. I don't know how long it went on for. And she is somebody who's so present in her body, so present in herself, so present in the moment. And this is just the way she lives her life. And I hope to God she never loses it, because what a beautiful way to move through life, just being so comfortable in herself, comfortable in her skin, none of these societal limitations that we all have in some respect. And I suppose for me, it's a bit of a funny one in our house, because my husband works in smart technology. My tools of choice, I'd probably use a stone carver and a rock if I could, but pen and paper are my weapons of choice. So there's that kind of two ends of the scale for both of us, and we kind of meet in the middle somehow. But yeah, I don't know, and they're very small, so I'm not in that world just yet. But certainly, I am pausing on the technology as much as I can. I don't want them not to be able to use a computer, of course, but for as long as I can get away without phones or particular devices and apps and so on. I want to do that because it's really interesting as well, looking at the psychology behind a lot of these apps and the dopamine hit that you get from scrolling. And I feel that we, children, adults, all of us miss out on what's actually going on around us. And I suppose for me, I am a nature lover. We're in the outdoors a lot. And I try and incorporate all of that into just our day-to-day lives and our walks, and even things, and this might be a tool for parents, for educators, or even just for yourself, to encourage those, introducing different breathing techniques for children, because we don't always breathe optimally, and there's so much that we can do with our breath. But even introducing breath through things like flowers and asking them to smell, different roses or different, and even, taking a nice deep breath in. What do you smell? And then breathing it out and just letting it go. So simple things like that can be a really effective way to start introducing self-management tools to people of all ages, really, but children especially.
What helpful tools there, Amy, and I mean that because you're not giving people kind of schedule or day altering activities. You're not taking up large chunks of their day. These are real kind of little things that you can fit in around otherwise potentially busy schedule, and I think that those are really important, almost in response to the busyness of the world that we have, which is perhaps unfortunate, but these tools and strategies that we need to develop kind of have to fit into that, and are aimed at taking you out of that, even if just for a brief moment. But Amy, it sounds like you're someone who's very much not bought into that kind of technologically focused and tuned in world too much, and that you're able to take a step back. I think that's a really great mode to be in for other for listeners to aspire to, and those that you work with, for sure.
And now, a word from one half of last week's guest duo, Opulent Education. It's Walter Kerr.
Thank you very much to Ludo for having Henry and myself on the Qualified Tutor podcast. We had a wonderful time. We never find much time to reflect, and that is, I suppose, one of the great joys of being a guest on a podcast, is that it gives you time to reflect on the business to date, and the questions that Ludo posed were interesting, and I hope were enjoyable for those who listened to them. It's funny. I mean, there's lots you enjoy about being a guest on a podcast. The fear is being too self-congratulatory, and or avoiding cliches around just getting started, which is often what we hear a lot. But we thoroughly enjoyed our time on the podcast. And what would I say to a future guest? I couldn't possibly give advice on that, but it's a sure good fun time, and Ludo is a brilliant host.
We're just kind of drawing to a close here, Amy. There's so much that you've packed into there. You've been speaking kind of so eloquently about ways to tune out, ways to self-manage, as you say, ways to reduce stress. But what's next for you, Amy? What's next for Amy Solon?
Gosh, my mind is always full of different ideas. I've over the last probably the last 6 months, I've been focusing very much on a course of combining my skills in a certain respect of yoga and my hypnotherapy, meditation, so on. So I've been really busy over the last 6 or 8 months creating these classes, which are very, very popular, which has been wonderful, and such a joy to get back after 2 years of not being in a yoga studio, to be able to do that again. So now that that's up and running, it's kind of looking after itself. I'm moving back and just putting a fresh eye on my parenting work, which I have such a love for. So that will be a large part of my focus probably over the next 6 months to a year, continuing to build on that, continuing to support different families, support those units to just instill habits and behaviors that can hopefully bring a little bit of calm as well, because I think you're right what you said. There's something about, you don't want to be putting huge effort into things or changing structures, or people get bored or feel they don't have the time, and sometimes the biggest changes can be from the smallest shifts. And just to pick up very quickly, if you don't mind, just on something that you said earlier on that I think was so important. You spoke about acknowledging people's feelings, whether that's you yourself as an educator, as a parent, as a human being, but also those feelings of our children or the children that we're working with. Their feelings are so valid. And I think one thing I am enjoying that has come out post-pandemic is that there's a greater focus on mental health. People are more open about expressing, and the data and the research really demonstrates that giving children that platform to express how they're feeling, because their feelings are valid. If they feel mad, that's okay, because that's their feelings. Their behavior mightn't be the best choices, but their feelings are valid, and we can solution find around, better, more appropriate behaviors. But equally, those feelings and expressing those feelings, it's so important. And the research is indicating very much that it does support better mental health in later life. So I just wanted to highlight that just a little bit, because I thought it was something really important that you raised earlier on.
Thank you, Amy. That's another great step for listeners to kind of take after this. In fact, if they want to get in touch with you straight after this, Amy, what is the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways. My Facebook page is Elements Hypnotherapy. That's ELEMENTS Hypnotherapy. I am also on Instagram, but I don't really use it very much because I don't understand it. I'm on LinkedIn as Amy Solon, SOLON. And my email address, or my website, is elementshypnotherapy.com. And you can get my email address there as well.
Look at that. Okay, so if there's a boost and a surge in likes and followers and connections, Amy, then you can thank the QT podcast.
Excellent.
Yeah, and if it's not, then people are just listening in, and they're taking on what you're saying and hopefully implementing it. So yeah, that was a hugely important conversation, not only because I've been meaning to introduce our audience to you, Amy, for quite some time, but also as we're here at towards the end of August, and we move into the autumn and to the winter, these kind of conversations are really important. We know that kind of the seasonal depressions and that kind of thing is strikes most as the summer comes to an end and we move into the colder, kind of longer nights. So yeah, thank you for coming on and discussing those things. I hope you enjoyed talking a little bit about what you do, Amy.
I certainly did. Loved the chat, and yeah, loved having the opportunity just to share a little bit more. And yeah, it was just lovely to speak to you. Thank you, Ludo.
That's not a problem. Next time we will be talking to a lady called Liberty King about a few lessons learnt from the first year of the NTP, about discovering a little bit more about how we can market ourselves as education businesses. So a really nice range of topics there after today's conversation about stress, anxiety, focus, technology, tuning out. Really, really important topics for educators and for ourselves as individuals, Amy. So thank you. And we will see all of you, dear listeners, next time. Thanks for tuning in. Cheerio then. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. Whether you're a regular listener of this podcast or you've just stumbled across it, Join the Qualified Tutor podcast group within the Qualified Tutor community to stay up to date with our latest news, offers, workshops, and of course, simply to meet other tutors like you. Whatever your level as a tutor, our training courses will be the next step in your professional development. Visit qualifiedtutor.org/training to find out more about our CPD accredited and Ofqual recognised courses, the first of their kind in the tutoring industry. Your student deserves the best tutor possible. Make that happen today by joining Qualified Tutor.